Jake Nyberg, your Deputy Director of Public Works and Interim Code Compliance Manager. So to really be someone at the city, you have to have two titles nowadays. You just can't have one. So again, welcome. Glad to see everybody here. I'm proud to announce that we've got our Escondido Police Department here to talk a little bit about the process that our COPS unit goes through. Now, I don't know if you know this, but we have a police department, we have a COPS unit. COPS sounds like police, but COPS really stands for community-oriented policing and problem solving. So you're going to see officers that deal more with quality of life policing than what you might typically think of the patrol guys chasing the bank robbers and what you see on TV. These are specialists that are deal a lot with behavioral issues and quality of life issues. So I'm excited to introduce, first off, Sergeant Jeff Valdivia is with us, and we're going to have him speak a little. He's got an officer with him, Martin Muhammad, on the COPS unit, and led by Captain Dave Kramer, who's going to have a nice presentation for us. Thank you guys for joining us and giving us your perspective on how policing is impacting homelessness. So before I introduce the rest of the group, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. For those of you that are going to be eating dinner with us tonight, there's a vending machine right behind us. They've got the flaming hot Cheetos, which are my favorite. So dinner is served in the vending machine right back there. As well as, hey, welcome, join us. Yeah, there's a sign-up sheet right here that's a good segue. Did everyone sign the sign-up sheet? It's the way to keep in contact with what's going on. If you haven't, we'll pass that around. Everybody sign the sign-up sheet so we have your email. Okay, boy, this is a high-performing group already. That's the only thing I asked out of you tonight is to fill that out. So thank you for that. Bathrooms are also right behind you. We have the doors look mean and menacing. They'll close behind you. There's a blue button. It'll open right for you. So if you use the bathroom at any time, if you need to take a cell phone call, please step out to an entrance or exit on this side or that side of the building. And also, before we get started, I want to mention we have a special guest with us tonight. Representing District 2, we have Councilmember Tina Insko. Thank you, Tina, for joining us. Yeah, really appreciate having a member of the council with us to hear what's going on is crucial. So thank you for your presence, sir. Really appreciate you being here. And also, we've got some city staff. I want to recognize Interim Director of Community Development, Adam Feinstone is in the back. Adam, thanks for joining us. We've got just getting up right now is Scarlett McElwee. She's an admin coordinator. Scarlett, thank you. I know you came in at 6 this morning. You're going to be here till 8 o'clock at night, and you haven't figured out you're not paid by the hour. So we'll get you that later. Also, special guest, I'm proud to announce we have just stole away a star candidate from the city of Carlsbad to be our new Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager, Holly Nelson, who is one of the best and brightest on the planet. In my opinion, I'm a big fan of yours, Holly, to get us to the next level. So, Holly, thanks for joining us. It's your first CAG as an employee, but your second CAG as being an observer. So, glad to have you. Also want to recognize we got the Director of Public Works, Joe Gillard, who's also heads up the city's Quality of Life team, which is crucial to this. Quality of Life team, as you know, brings together all city departments that can impact homelessness. And Joe, in addition to his job, he gets another title too, as heading up Quality of Life and being the Director of Public Works, Joe. So thank you for being here. And last and certainly not least, we've got our Deputy City Manager, Rob Vandehay, and also 2 titles. He's the Director of Information Services, and I'll give him 3 titles. He's leading the charge of the city's homelessness push and response. So you're the ranking title person in the room, Rob. So we're glad to have you, and I think that's a good segue, Rob, to maybe have you add a couple things I might have missed, and then we'll bring up the COPS unit from there. Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. I'll start off by saying, I really appreciate you guys taking time out to come and have this discussion. The city has put together this opportunity, and we have this on a quarterly basis to come in and talk about homelessness. It's a very big conversation. It's very complex. It's something that the entire nation, entire world is really kind of dealing with. And so what we did is, in order to really have the conversations, we try to break it up into different titles, different sections. So we kind of focus on different things at each one of the meetings, but we do give a little bit of background and some other context of other things that might be going on, some current events, some current trends, some stuff that you might hear in the news. Speaking of the news, it's really hard. I hear the stuff that comes up in the news. I read a bunch of articles that come up online, and when you read it, it's it doesn't always tell the full story. So you can get lost in the conversation. It's real easy to do that. Even all the different complexities that are happening local to us, there's so many different facets to it. So it's really important that we have this conversation. We give you guys a platform to come and discuss items with us, and hear from you and your perspective and what's really going on. What do you see? What challenges are you facing with? How can you get involved? How can you help? We really want to make sure that we create a platform for this discussion, and I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your personal lives to come and join us in this conversation. Truly, we all must come together. Service providers, city staff, we all have a role to play, and you as citizens also have a role to play in this. So I really appreciate you taking that first step and really coming out and joining us. And please, whatever gets talked about here today, tell your neighbors, your friends, your families, anyone you can come across, tell them about these meetings. Tell them about how they can get involved and what they can do, and that they do have a role to play in this, one way or another. Even if they're just telling the story or passing on their information, their views of what's kind of going on, that everyone has a place to come and have this conversation. So we do this on a quarterly basis, but there's a lot more going on in the city than just this. We meet with our service providers on a regular basis. Everyone who's that's a service provider provides some sort of service to try to help the homeless. We try to meet with them on a regular basis, try to coordinate that. While the city doesn't necessarily play that role as a service provider, we have the ability to coordinate and connect, and we try to do that. And it's a growing group, right? It's not a one and done. It's an ongoing conversation, because as the world keeps moving on in this conversation, we learn things every day. We get data back. We try to do different things. You could even hear in the news sometimes about how a certain city has solved homelessness. Who here has heard that?
Alcohol. Yeah, just heard that.
We hear that, right? If you drive down to El Cajon right now and you drive around in the streets, or we recently did a point-in-time count, do you think that you're maybe not going to see anybody who's homeless if they've solved it? Right? So these things that we hear in the news are very complex. So again, that's another reason why we want to have this conversation, and we want to hear what's going on. We want to hear your perspectives and join in. That's why we have different focal points tonight. We'll hear from Captain Kramer about law enforcement and kind of what we're doing in that space. But the city does a lot of things in a lot of different areas. So I'll give you a little bit of a background. One of our first meetings was talking about the role the city plays. What do we do, right? We're a connector. How many different departments are involved in our efforts? All the way from city council, all the way down to so many different departments. We have Joe Glenn is the person who leads our quality of life team. There's 10 different departments that are part of that team. Right? So it doesn't just affect one department. There's a big city effort in this area. So that was one of our first meetings, and we really wanted to talk about that. We had service providers come in and do a presentation with different service providers come up here, put some stuff up on the screen, talk through the different programs that they have. It wasn't extensive by all means, or exhaustive by all means. It was a chance for us to start that conversation, to make people more aware of all the different services that are out there, or how many different providers we might have out there. It was pretty eye-opening. We also talked about businesses. We had businesses come in here, and we talked about stuff that they can do on their property if they're being impacted by non-customers, right? Talked about set types of concepts and ideas and things that they can do, how they can interact with the city. Tonight, we'll have Captain Kramer come up, and we'll have a different focal point of this meeting. But before tonight's over, we'll also have a chance for you guys to talk and join the conversation. We'd like to hear from you a little bit. We'll also talk about some of the latest concepts that are out there, like the by name list, for example. If those of you haven't heard that, that's one of the things that's kind of trending since the early stages, right? It brings a lot more accountability. It brings a lot more of the conversation around, we're trying to help an individual, right? These aren't just a group of people, they're individuals out there. So we need to get to know who they are. What kind of things do they need, right? How can we help them in that journey to become housed? So we'll bring up different programs that are kind of getting off the ground and what's kind of going on there. We can talk about the point-in-time count that just recently happened. It was a fantastic event here in Escondido. We had so many volunteers. It was it was so nice to see everybody come out and really participate. 4 in the morning, right? We're out there on the streets, trying to connect to the individuals who are out there that are unhoused and trying to get to know who they are and what their situation is. That's going to lead to solutions. So, with that being said, I want to introduce Captain Kramer, have him come on up and start the next part of our discussion here.
Thank you, Ron. Well, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today and to speak to you on just one facet or one component of dealing with homelessness. That is an issue that we are all facing in our community. But before getting into it, I just want to give you a little bit of history of myself to maybe establish some relevance or some credibility. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years. It'll be 27 in September of this year. I spent several years over the course of my career in the community-oriented policing arena. I was a sector officer, which back then that was someone who handled a portion of the city and dealt with quality of life issues. And back then there were just a myriad of quality of life issues that we dealt with, but it was my responsibility to take care of, to handle, to be a project manager for problems and issues that occurred in that portion of town that I was on. Another part of my career, I was on the bike team, which was out of this unit, and we performed just proactive law enforcement on bicycles. And in addition to that, because we were on bicycles and we rode around, we had the ability to interact with the public or business owners more readily and more easy than officers that are tied to a radio, which I'll go over in a second. In 2017, I was the lieutenant of the community-oriented policing unit as it was resurrected after some budget cuts and constraints that occurred prior to that. And now I am the captain over the Operations Bureau, which covers a lot of things, which I have on a slide, but part of that is the COPS unit, which Jake talked about, and Sergeant Valdivia is currently leading that. So that's me in a nutshell as it pertains to this. And what I want to talk about a couple things about what we are and what we aren't. Because oftentimes when you talk about homelessness, and I'm not saying in this arena, but it's very much like it's either services or enforcement. And they create this false imperative. It's either this or that. And like Rob said, it's complex. This is a hugely complex societal issue. And to distill it down to it's either services or law enforcement is an argument that I'm not willing to have with folks. And because it is more complex than that, and it's a little bit of both, and people have their own opinion. But so I want to talk about, and that's why I have this pie chart here. If that clip art, the pie chart, represents the different aspects of homelessness, right? Government, service providers, hospitals, mental institutions. I'm just carving out that piece, the light blue piece, and saying, I'm just talking about law enforcement. This is what we do and why we do it and why we're there and what we're trying to do to participate. Because we don't have the choice of backing out and not participating. We have to participate. I mean, it would be silly for us or irresponsible to do that. Not only from we're servants of the public, but also, we get paid to maintain public order, manage public safety, and enforce the laws. That's what we do. That's what society has asked us to do for hundreds of years. And that hasn't changed. Now the scope of it, to what degree, has changed. But the basic premise of what we do, of enforcing laws, maintaining public order, and manage public safety is it. And we are expected to fulfill that duty, regardless of status, regardless of sheltered or unsheltered, or homeless or living in a house, socioeconomic status, any status you want. I purposely left out regardless of being homeless. It's really about status. Regardless of that, we need to enforce laws, maintain public order. We can't overlook someone who's committing some crimes that is homeless, just like we can't overlook someone committing crime that does have a residence. And then, so why are we in the homeless business as law enforcement officers? Well, I think early on, when this became an issue 3-4 years ago, it was because we were the only ones out there at 3 in the morning on a Saturday night on Christmas Eve, right? Type thing, when it was raining. We were the only ones out there. Now, service providers have made great strides in getting out in the streets and reaching the people where they are, and to meet them in their place of despair. But early on, when this became the beginnings of this social issue, we were the only ones out there. So it was very natural for us to kind of have that burden of responsibility of solving the problem or mitigating the problem or trying to help people get off the streets fell on us. And it was a natural fit, and I get it. But we have limitations because our main purpose is that first bullet, not really outreach. But we're used to dealing with a lot of different problems and issues, and we were able to adjust, and we do have outreach, and you'll see in a few slides, there is some premise for us in which to operate that helps kind of manage or mitigate the homelessness. And then, as we see, there is a crime and disorder portion of the homeless problem, right? So, of course, we're gonna be involved and always be involved. So again, this slide is, I wanna talk about the enforcement component, and that's what I'm here to talk about, not talking about other things. And then just to go, there is a disorder, there is a criminal element, and we are out in these areas, and we see these things, and we make contact with these people. And so we're involved, and we're here to stay, and we wanna be part of it, and we're looking for partners, and we're looking for ways to help solve this problem or manage it the best we can. It frustrates us as well. So now I want to dive into the community-oriented policing philosophy. And it's a department-wide philosophy, and what that means is that we're out there to solve problems and to help prevent crime from a department standpoint. The chief of police wants us out there engaged with the public, engaged with people. You know, crimes, crashes in communities are his pillars to prevent crashes or reduce crashes, to prevent crime, and to arrest criminals in order to, you know, reduce people who become victims of crime. The one problem that we have in doing that, in being as community-oriented as we can, if you go back to that Norman Rockwell picture of that officer sitting at the diner next to the kid who has his bandana tied to the stick. You guys with me on that? Right? That's the image that we would all like to have as having the police department or police officers engage in. And us as police officers would like to be that. But the one thing that stops us from being that all the time, or as much as we would like to, is that radio. That radio is constantly calling us to go somewhere else, to do something, to go handle this, to stop what you're doing here and go there, to stop that and go over here, because we prioritize calls. Now that radio is busier sometimes than others, but that radio has an insatiable appetite and demands a lot of attention. And so if you want to handle quality of life issues as a chief of police or a city manager or a mayor, you have to carve people away from that radio. So I talked about myself being a sector officer or a bike team member. Although we had a radio, I was not responsible for answering that radio for particular calls. I had the freedom to go out and do the things that I needed to do. And so we have that. We have several units. We have a gang enforcement unit that their responsibility is gang enforcement. yeah, they answer calls, but their primary responsibility is not the radio. We have traffic units, so the motorcycle cops that you see or other police officers that perform traffic functions, their main focus is traffic enforcement to reduce crashes. If we didn't have that, they'd be tied to the radio and they wouldn't be able to enforce traffic laws or engage in public education to reduce crime, or not crime, but crashes. And then we have the cops unit. And the cops unit, again, is carved out, and their main purpose is to handle long-term issues, persistent, locations with persistent crime. They have the time to work with public works, to liaison with code enforcement, the city manager, the city attorney's office, to meet with neighborhood groups or property managers about specific problems. Again, if they were tied to this radio, they wouldn't have the time, and there would be that conflict. We say your main responsibility is these things. Don't worry about the radio, keep an ear on it. You're responsible for something, but again, to drive this point home, their main responsibility is to handle quality of life issues. So in my intro, I talked about an organizational chart, and this is a basic chart of the department. As you can see on the far left, Operations Bureau, that's me, I'm the captain of that bureau. I'm in charge of patrol, so all the patrol officers that are responsible for handling the radio calls in their particular beat or sector. I have the traffic division. Dispatch used to be under me, that needs to slide over. Some training components, and then as you see, I have the cops unit. And again, I've talked about that. So the cops unit handles quality of life issues. Right now, the major quality of life issue is homelessness, so that's why they're dabbling in that more than other things, but they have dealt with, and Jeff has done a good job since taking over of dealing with some of the other quality of life issues. But undoubtedly, the number one quality of life issue in the city is the homeless population that they're dealing with. So here's our current staffing. It's a little shy. We're coming off of a time where there was a mass exodus within the department. So we have one sergeant, which is Sergeant Valdez. We have 2 cops officers. We're authorized 6 cops officers. Council unfroze some positions, and 5 positions. We put 3 into community-oriented policing and 2 into traffic. And we, as a department, are trying to get the personnel hired so we can fill those positions. So we're working towards that as we speak. But right now, we have 2 cops officers, 1 per officer, and that officer is a police officer, sworn, gun badge, and all that. But he has a PERT clinician that rides with them. And we have a community service officer that does a lot of our crime prevention through environmental design. Stuff in a department specialist that helps with statistics and other type of miscellaneous tasks that need to be done too, which supports the other officers and Sergeant Valdivia. So we have a 4-pronged approach to our job. And this is primarily for the homeless when we talk about this. It is key that we deal with everybody with dignity and respect. So dealing with folks over and over again and offering them services and dealing with them can get frustrating. But it is highly important that the officers maintain that level of respect for the person, because you can never anticipate when that person is gonna accept. Have I been blocking you the whole time? I'm such a bad presenter. I'm so sorry. Gotta slide my keyboard over. So I'm so sorry about that. You never know when that person is gonna want to accept services. And so we already we're already kind of behind the power curve, if I could use that, because of the uniform that we wear, the badge, our gun, and that the police powers that we do have. So people are already less inclined to want to deal with us. So we need to be aware of that and compensate for that the best we can. And the main way to do that is just to be as human as possible with, with not being unsafe and treating people with dignity and respect. And it's just is what it is, right? We have arrest powers and people are fearful of us and we understand that. And with that, there's an obligation from some people in society that we do make arrests or we're mandated to make arrests at the time. So there's just a huge gap in the trust between some of the people on the streets and us. The magic to it is treating people with dignity and respect. Another thing the cops unit does is environmental transformation. So we could go to the same location, like the picture that was earlier of all the stuff spread out. And if we don't transform that environment, we will just keep going back to the same place over and over and over again. So there's some concepts called crime prevention through environmental design. So very simply, we could add some lights, we could cut down some trees. One of the projects that Sergeant Valdivia and his crew along with Public Works did is at this end of this cul-de-sac by 78 and Quint by Motel 6. They're laying down some rock and concrete to prevent people from living there. And so the goal is to make it both appealing to the eye when you're driving through so we don't create our own blight, but yet a little less comfortable for folks to sit and sleep and whatnot. So that's the environmental transformation. The hope is that we can go there and fix the problem and not have to keep going back over and over and over again. Very simplistic view of environmental transformation. And then empathy-driven enforcement. So again, with that dignity and respect is an understanding that a lot of the people that are living on the streets have a lot of trauma. I mean, what took place in their lives to get them there, right? It's sad, and we know firsthand. So not only do they have a lot of trauma that got them there, but then when you're living on the streets, you occur a lot more trauma, and we know those stories well. So it's that balance of there's an expectation for us to enforce the laws and to maintain law and order, but to do it in a way that kind of fits the entire picture and the entire circumstance. And that's messy, that's gray, that there's no cookie cutter formula to that. It's the officer at the time, given the situation at the time and the person that they're dealing with and what they're doing and all that. Because I'll go into this civic harmony kind of piece in a little bit. And then human transformation, right? We're always offering services. We're always willing to have someone say, "Hey, I've had enough." And I'll tell this quick story that happened several years ago. It was raining, and the cops unit was out there, and I was a lieutenant at the time, and we had more officers, there were 4, and this one officer went and wrote this guy a citation for sleeping in private property, and did it because he had to, because we've had a lot of complaints from that area, and we needed to do something to help that business owner, but treated him with dignity and respect, treated him as a human being, had a conversation with him, and did what he had to do. And I came rolling around about 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, and I ended up talking to him, and he goes, Officer Rob Craig just talked to me a while ago, and I am willing to accept services. I do want to get off the streets. I do want help, right? Now, I tell that story to illustrate that it does happen, and I got a slide here to show you it doesn't happen all the time, but it's one of those things where you always have to be ready, willing, and prepared to do that. And there's a guy that had a family, had a good job, just started drinking, and the alcoholism just got away from him, lost everything, his family, his home, and all that, and had been living on the streets for quite a while, and had hit rock bottom, at that time. So it was just that convergence of everything, right? He was just tired, it was raining, Rob Craig treated them well. All those things just came together. Time to get someone off the street. So our competencies, dignity and respect. What I'll hone in on this slide is that civic harmony, which is the three-legged stool. So we cannot ignore the residents and their visitors, or the business owners and their customers, for those that commit crimes. Easily said, difficult in practice. Again, going back to that, hey, you know, should you arrest those guys? Do you really need to write them a cite? Yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's messy, and there's no clear answer. I will say, though, that our conversation should always be honed around, or not honed, should be honed and should be centered on civic harmony, not getting too out of balance. That'd be my proposal to anybody. Not should you arrest, should you not, should you cite, should you not, but are we as a city maintaining that civic harmony and not getting too far off? Now, knowing that there are vehicles for the residents to speak and business owners and customers to voice their opinion, and many of those homeless folks don't have a vehicle or a voice. So being cognizant of that, but also maintaining some balance. And then just the last piece on time. Again, they're carved away from the radio. They have time to build relationships. Relationships with folks on the street, relationships with service providers, relationships with other city departments. Sorry about that. I wanted to delete this slide. I thought I did. And so I talked to the story. I told you the story about the guy who was in the rain and got a cite. This is a guy named Larry who had been on the streets for over 20 years. And over a course of time and with contacts, he took us up on the offer and got off the streets. And this is him a while later being cleaned up. Just look at the transformation. Again, there was a lot of things that got him on the streets. There was a lot of things to push him to get off. We were just one of the groups or entities or organizations that was there to capture him. Even though that officer did wear a uniform, has a gun, has arrest powers, through dignity and respect and human contact, you know, he accepted our services. I don't think we're the best vehicle for that. I think it's service providers. But again, we're not going to fully back out. We're part of the game and we're here to play. Not in that bad sense, right? Meaning the game it's there and we want to be participant. Not that this is a game. So there's some questions on when to call and what phone number to call in the police department. And really, if it's a crime in progress, right, a violent crime, someone's life's in danger, call 911. And you can call 911 on a landline, or there's a number for cell phone 911. Because if you use your cell phone for 911, it's going to go to CHP and it has to get routed, so there's that. Now, what if you're a property owner and there's someone sleeping in front of your business, or there's a bunch of stuff out and about on some property? That is a crime in progress, sure. But, you know, non-emergency type events should call 40722. Now, where the frustration happens with folks sometimes is that they call and they feel like we don't show up. Well, I'll tell you, we always show up. We just don't necessarily show up when people think we should show up, or what happens sometimes is the officers don't make contact with the person calling. Like I saw you shook your head out. Oh, sure, and I'm going to hear about that, or if not, I'll talk about it.
You'll hear about it.
Yeah. So that happens. I'm not saying we're perfect. And then the other thing about that is is we have to prioritize calls. There are at times more calls than officers, and some calls hold higher weight than others, and we prioritize. And then there's another sense or source of frustration when people call that, you know, we don't show up for, you know, you name it, an hour, 2 hours. It's not as bad as other departments, but it can be delayed at times. And then there are times where a crisis occurs and we suspend certain calls, so that might be it. But again, I'm not here to make any excuses, and just would love to hear what you guys have to say on that. Am I clear? Am I good to go off of this slide? Okay. And then I'm opening up for questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
This is probably a really simple question. Two of you have mentioned service providers. What's a service provider? Who's a service provider?
Great question. You know, sometimes it's an example of we live in this world every day, and so we understand all that stuff like that. Holly, do you have a succinct answer you maybe want to offer to that?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Holly again, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I was once a service provider. I'm now not doing what we call direct service. I'm working in city government and trying to elevate the voice of my years of experience working with people at that level. But basically, a service provider is somebody usually working at a nonprofit. It also could be somebody working at a faith center, also a community clinic, a health clinic. It could be in lots of different facets, but somebody who's usually working with somebody one-on-one, providing case management. It could be providing outreach, could be providing counseling services, and their goal is essentially trying to meet the person where they're at and move them through that stage of change to connect them to resources. The ultimate goal for somebody experiencing homelessness is to get them housed, is to get them off the streets, and obviously along that way we might be connecting them with other resources. Sometimes it's the basic needs of, you know, clothing, food, ID card. Sometimes it's more complicated, like substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment. But sometimes it's just about getting them connected to different housing benefits, different resources, different things like that. But the city does contract with different service providers. We do receive federal funds that allows us to put out proposals to get contract with different people. So we do work with programs like Interfaith Community Services, Escondido Compact, the Senior Center, YMCA, different things like that provide resources in the community. But hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Thank you.
Sometimes it's not just one service provider. The client mentioned a whole bunch of different things of why somebody might be on the streets, and so they might need to connect to a bunch of different resources. And the service providers work pretty well together. They have different programs, and getting health services is another big part. Neighborhood health care does a lot of great work in that area. So it's really just like we talked about. It's a very complex problem, and it takes a lot of different resources. And the city's role, we don't offer those types of services, but we do get access to federal funding, which allows us to really look for the needs, try to fill some of the gaps. Now the service providers that are providing these great services in our city are funded by us. Sometimes they're funded directly from the county, directly from the state, or they just find private funding. And so it's really a big conversation. That's why we had one particular meeting just on service providers, because it's really a fascinating, topic, because you'd be amazed on how many people, how many organizations are out there doing this great work out there. Yes.
You brought it up that there's some people don't want to interact with the police that are homeless, for a myriad of reasons. Is there I saw something that there was PERT, and that was somebody that would ride along with the officer.
Right.
Is there going to be growth in that? Because I believe that there should be somebody riding along with the officer. There should be dedicated officers for dealing with homelessness. And then even beyond that we need to come up with real concrete ways on how to deal with homelessness. Or how as a society that we kind of accept that there's going to be a certain amount of homeless people, because I look at it as three different levels. There's people that chronically want to be homeless, there's people that have mental problems, and there's people that have addiction problems. So they all kind of fall in those different scopes, and that's going to kind of dictate where they are. Are you guys gearing up for doing more PERT and having more ride-along, clinical services along with the officers?
I don't know if you have a direct answer I can give you.
You wanna go first and then I'll go, or?
You know what, no, there's definitely a need, right? There's a need, and we are in bigger conversations, not just Escondido itself, but North County as a region, and also entire county, about what are some of the needs, what are some of the gaps, and what needs to be filled, what kind of resources do we need to have, and where should they be? We talked a little bit, like you were referring to law enforcement. Should they be riding with law enforcement? Should there be a specialized team that can respond to certain individuals who are on the streets with certain symptoms? And that's why it's really important for us to get to know who's out there and what their situation is, so we can be a little more proactive. We're not waiting for a 911 call to respond to that. We really want to be in a situation where we're getting to know people and trying to get them to transform into a different living situation. If they're a danger to somebody, then we want to make sure we address that. And that's part of the reason why currently that clinician rides with an officer, is because some of those situations are dangerous.
And then you keep a database on people that kind of says, okay, we know their name, we know what their symptoms are, we know, interactions that we've had with them before. I mean, we've seen multiple from unit to unit.
Sure, so the PERT clinician has a database that, because of HIPAA, has to stay in that lane, right? And so we do get some information, but it's sanitized, because we need to gauge matrix and whatnot, but, and then the county's coming up with the mobile crisis response team. And that is the county's attempt to maybe go from, you got a social worker working for Interfaith that is going out with a partner, trying to do some outreach, and then you have us with PERT, and the PERT clinician, has training, she wears a bulletproof vest, but, and so they're not a good fit, and maybe Interfaith isn't, so just to fill some of that gap is the mobile crisis response team. And they're gonna be self-sufficient, have a van, have a clinician. Who else, Holly?
They have a peer support specialist.
And so they're looking to fill that gap. I think the trend, what you're gonna see, is more and more organizations, most likely governmental, coming in and kind of fill that gap, and law enforcement, who was out front because of the time of day and night and all that stuff that I talked about earlier, what we were already out there, you're starting to see the agencies come out and be more street-oriented, I'll call it, and us backing up and maybe filling more of a role that better fits the tool that we are for society.
And then does that funding come from the county rather than from like your local budget for those
That's
specialized units?
That's
That helps.
Yeah, that's the county program, the mobile crisis response team is a county-funded program, not City of Escondido.
So is PERT.
Is it?
PERT is also.
Oh, PERT, yeah. So we pay for the officer and the car and the equipment. PERT, the county program, the clinician, her salary is all from the county. I'm gonna take your hand.
We have three per clinician.
Yeah, so we have 3 PERT clinicians, 2 work in patrol, 1 in cops. And so I was kind of just sticking to the homelessness realm as opposed to patrol, but yeah, they go handle patrol calls. Some of it may be homeless related, but the PERT clinician and officer team that works within the cops unit, their sole purpose is to go out and make contact with people experiencing homelessness that have shown a history of mental illness and just needing that help.
It seems like the homeless problem has increased, particularly downtown. Is that something that you guys are seeing, and did you learn that through the count? And is that something that you're going to be addressing with these?
Downtown Escondido?
Yeah,
Or downtown?
downtown Escondido.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, after that rain, we saw a huge increase of people downtown. And I related to the fact that they could get out of the rain and under some shelter in the little alcoves of Grand Avenue. And so we saw that. We heard the business owners and the DVA gave us a lot of feedback on that. And so It took us a little bit to kind of reestablish equilibrium, we're gonna call it that. Yeah. Okay, your turn.
So mine is, I'm on Julianne Jones, DBA. I've called the non-emergency number several times. And there's a homeless camp that is live and active in Lot 4. And it's a group of gentlemen that they have luggage, they have dogs,
Yep.
they have dog bowls, they have tents.
I talked to them, they were on Grand Avenue,
Yeah,
right after that.
okay, when I
rain.
called, they were on public property.
Okay,
And trying to communicate that right now they are on the sidewalk and they jump over to 7-Eleven's lot, and your dispatch was very rude. She said, there's nothing we can do about it, it's not public property. And I said, currently they are on public property, they're on the sidewalk. So, and she says, well, what are they doing? And I said, they're bullying the homeless people that have really bad problems. I mean, there's different levels of homelessness, but these guys look more like traveler homeless because they're intimidating the homeless people downtown in the rain and all that. They've got their gear on. They've got rain gear on. So I've called this a couple of times, and I actually was treated very rudely by your dispatch. She pretty much hung up because she says there's nothing we can do about it. And I thought to myself, listen, I've had 4 businesses on Grand in 20 years. I've dealt with naked people walking into my business wanting cardboard and Sharpies. So there has to be something, but like we were talking about as a group, it starts with putting together a system that creates sober living, that's way down the line, but you gotta detox them, you gotta get them in shape, and there's gotta be a spot for them. And right now, like you said, you encourage them, quote, to go into alcoves. Those are our businesses, and they do die there, and that has happened too, on several occasions. So I think overall, the community needs to have a place, like the hotels, and like some of them are for women and children, and but there's a large, it's growing, the population of the homeless is actually huge from 20 years ago.
I'll tell it.
Yeah, okay, and there's been knifings in parking lots, it's intimidating. But when you call the police department, the non-emergency number, and you're trying to talk to someone that really is not interested in this topic at all anymore, she's probably heard it all day long, God bless her.
Right.
Okay, but there's several occasions I've watched and I've called, there was no response. There was literally a lady doing a fashion show on Juniper and 2nd, taking her clothes off, putting new clothes on, for about an hour while we were at a diner. I saw police officers drive by and do nothing. And this was nudity. So it's really complex, and I know it's a hard issue, and I know we have to come up with solutions, but I know in the 80s and 90s, there was men's drug and alcohol facilities that handled this problem.
Right.
And it was detox, and it was overnight, and then it was rehab or AA or NA or whatever.
Right.
But it's a layered process. It's not like you can just pull somebody off the street, boom, you're not homeless. So, but like Dan says, there's many layers of it with mental health. But I don't really see any progress. And I'm not being negative. I've been on Grand. I have 4 businesses on Grand.
Sure.
And you can't just keep pushing them to somewhere else. Okay, you take away the encampment comes downtown, or it's really upsetting. So, anyways, I'm long-winded and I will stop. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for what you have to say.
I'm Katie Cowan, Escondido Times Advocate. So I wanted to know, first of all, the concerns that I think a lot of people have are health concerns. San Diego, just a few years ago, had the hepatitis A outbreak. So that's one of the scares. And then, of course, there's this, and I just spoke to a few people a couple of days ago, finding piles of excrement, human excrement, in and around downtown Escondido. That's a pretty serious health hazard. And someone dying in the front steps, that's a pretty serious health hazard.
It shuts the
So-
business down for days.
So what are we thinking, and what's in process to try to alleviate and foresee or get ahead of this problem so we don't find ourselves in the same situation in San Diego a few years ago.
Do you mind, if I just tag on to what Katie just said? She and I were talking about this on the phone the other day, and, I'm curious why we don't have restrooms that the homeless can use. I do know that there's one restroom in the West Side Park that is, off the brand near, anyway. But
Yeah, why we can't just.
why can't they have a restroom?
Right, because the one at Great Day Park, like, we do functions there, and we pretty much have to clear out. And I'm not kidding, what I've seen in that bathroom, from showers to sexual activity.
Well, now you just
Yeah.
answered my question, why we don't have restrooms.
I know, because it's a public restroom, and it's right across from the Children's Discovery Center. It's not okay. We need something they've got to go to the bathroom, and if you clear out their camps, that makes, they're even desperate to find housing, and they're not gonna live in foyers, and like you said, but they're gonna have to go to the bathroom, they're gonna have to wash their hands. So we need some type of facility. We used to have the barracks on Ash and Washington. We used to have those Quonset huts, and there's plenty of place, but we need a place for them to sober up and to get good food, clothing, and to get a couple nights of good rest before they start either detoxing, because right now you're just hurting cats. It's like you just move them, and they come, and it's really sad.
What is being done?
I haven't seen anything being done, honestly.
To go back to your question, there's a lot of stuff being done. Unfortunately, you cannot force anyone, to kind of answer your question too. Everyone has rights, and so we are working very hard, and we're working very collectively, not just as a city, but as a region, as an entire county, as an entire state, to try to find these solutions. There are no easy solutions for everything you might think you want to do that we try. We're also doing research, because there are a lot of different states trying a lot of different things. So we have the ability to go and have these conversations with these other cities and say, what are you doing? We have the ability to read about these things, hear back from different studies, what's being successful, what's not, what are the challenges, what resources do we have as a city? We don't have unlimited resources either. So we're trying our best to meet the need, really understand what those needs are, and look at our resources that we have available to us and our partners, the county and the states, and seeing what resources they have to offer. I think Holly has something she wants to contribute.
Yeah, I think you bring up all really valid points, and the health is really important. And so some of the things that the here in Escondido that we've done is that we've had in our outreach, we've had public health nurses go out with our outreach teams to do vaccinations, not only for COVID, but also hepatitis A vaccinations. And that is not, thankfully, an issue, as much of an issue now, but we've been handing out hygiene kits, hand washing. There's been hand washing stations that people have, the county has offered to put in different communities. So that's something that's a resource that's available. And then also too, with recently, right now, we're in the middle of evaluating what programs we should fund for next year for our 2022-2023 fiscal year. And homelessness, basic needs, these are two of the biggest issues that we've heard time and time again. And so we're going to put out recommendations, and we would love community input of where we should put this. And so, in public restrooms, because some people really want them and some people don't want them, because there are, fallouts. I came from the city of Carlsbad where we had 3 public porta potty restrooms, and we heard a lot of feedback from the community about those. So it is something that, if the community is interested in that, this is a time where you please provide us feedback. It is something that we want to make sure that people have access to basic rights. And then also kind of what Rob was saying regarding the complications around treatment. We have a limited number of substance abuse treatment facilities and detox. In order to qualify for them now, you actually have to meet medical necessity to get into them.
Yeah, the fellowship center did.
So you can't just go in, you can't just say, I have, they screen you, and you have to, like a doctor, you have to, meet medical necessity. And so just because you say that you have a struggle with substances, they may say, no, we actually think you're more appropriate for outpatient care. And so because of COVID, just like a lot of different things, a lot of programs have reduced capacity, and substance use treatment is one of those programs, because of ability to maintain proper spacing and different things like that. So it has been really challenging. We as system providers have had a lot of issues trying to get people connected to treatment. And so we've had to have people detox in, emergency rooms and different facilities like that. But it is a challenging system. So it's always very layered, but it is something that we're trying to look into, and we are open to feedback around that. So.
Absolutely, but in the 90s, like the Fellowship Center on Grand Avenue, one of the oldest facilities, they started a program that was pretty large back then. It was during the time when they did set up medical detoxes in different buildings that were empty. It really started to get the ball rolling. We had the first night, it was a huge event, trying to raise money. But really you need cots, beds, sleep, tents, and water, and soap, and bathrooms, to start. And really to create a place that's, I always thought Mount Vernon was the place for this, because I have this whole idea about putting it back to work, a farm and things like that. But it's a slow process, but it's not, you can't just keep moving them. And that's what the city of Carlsbad and Oceanside, because the Sprinter, guess where they're coming? They're coming up here because it's the land of Great Day Park.
Yeah.
And they can get it's just really sad. But I think really the community needs to pull together and have some type of a temporary camp situation that's clean, that has trash, that has outhouses and showers, just to get started.
Has there been anything talked about in
I know, because
regard
it's
to,
so obvious. what we need.
I have talked with the mayor and said, look, I've got guys that'll do these foldable homes and bring them, they can sleep 6 people per, we can get them for $5,000, and we can start raising money to try to help with that. It went nowhere. The next one was, is there just some place that we can, and as a community, encourage people to go and say, look, this is where you can be if you want to sleep on the street in Escondido. This is where you can do it. And in those spaces, provide someplace that they can use the facilities, someplace that they can clean up, someplace that they can store their stuff so that when they are off getting cleaned up and hopefully maybe applying for a job, because that's what they really want to do, that their stuff isn't being stolen, or if they've been arrested. And I'm hearing that when they're cited and arrested, they get taken over to Vista. Vista's a revolving door in the jail there, because they just kick them right out because they don't want to have them in there. So, if that's the case, that doesn't do any good. So it's a waste of time, and it's hurting goodwill. Is there something that we can do?
I think you guys are talking about the complexity. This is why we start with to open up. This is extremely complex, right?
But we just talked
And
about
so-
the hospital, that would have been the perfect place.
Yeah, that's on my part. We have a question back here in the back.
I had a question on just a more specific note. You mentioned some of the programs that you're doing, one of them being the hotel partnership. Who actually directs that? Is that something that comes through the city that identifies a hotel location and they identify people that qualify for that housing scenario, and then they pay the hotel to house the people there? Or is it come through the city? Does it come through the county, the state, some of these faith organizations? What is the chain of?
Yeah, so we currently have a contract through the emergency solution grants for people who are experiencing homelessness right now, because we know that congregate living settings, like shelter conditions, aren't really safe for those who are really high risk. Those are really vulnerable, 65 plus, those who are immunocompromised, people who have cancer, people who are just really, really vulnerable. And so during the pandemic, as everyone may have heard, Project Room Key, different kind of names like that, Governor Newsom set out funds to help people who are really, really vulnerable get into shelter. And so Interfaith Community Services, when their shelter has concerns around health or some COVID concerns, or they need to have they're at capacity, we want to, or maybe if somebody tries to get into the shelter but they don't really kind of meet those criteria and they're really high risk, we do have a temporary emergency shelter contract with them right now that we, if you go and screen through them, you can see if they're appropriate fit.
What is the screening process for that?
So you would contact Interfaith Community Services, Hussein, and contact the regular Haven House process and see, and if they have to be, experiencing homelessness here in Escondido, that the criteria is very minimal. And if you want to talk more offline, I'm happy to
No,
share.
we actually want to talk about that here, because there's quite a few of us that are involved in a community where there's a hotel that's being utilized, and every single person that you just described is not in that hotel.
Okay, I don't know what other kind of programs are running. Sometimes there are like faith-based organizations that sometimes do night vouchers. We do have in San Diego, there was a program being run down there, but I don't know of any other programs right now being run here.
So I've called Interfaith, this hotel is not a part of Interfaith, so whose hotel would this be a part of?
Escondido Lodge.
Escondido Lodge, there's a massive problem, sex trafficking, prostitution, drugs, all day long. I called the police 4 times this morning before 10 a.m. 10 a.m.
But we can't seem to figure out
Who's giving this guy? I went online, I tried to book a room at that hotel. It is completely booked out through the end of the year, and that's only because their system is maxed out. They don't go past the end of the year. These people are doing, I saw 4 drug deals in a split second of being in the parking lot next door.
Can you do me a favor, just kind of lower your voice a little bit? We're here to have a discussion.
I know, but this is really upsetting to a lot of us here.
And that's why we're here to have the conversation, but it starts to feel like you're yelling at us.
I'm not yelling at you, I'm very upset about the situation.
I understand.
So,
I am speaking with passion, and I speak like this, and I'm happy when I say passion. I'm a loud person, so I'm not yelling at you, I'm just trying to convey that we have a very massive issue in our neighborhood, and not one person in an entire year has tried to help us. It is really bad now.
Escondido Lodge is a whorehouse.
It's a crack whorehouse.
And we see it all the time on the street, right outside the gate.
Yeah.
Locked gate, they're right out there doing drugs, everything else.
So let me ask this, let me just ask this, and I'm not placing blame. We just heard about that earlier today.
It's because I called.
No, we got an email, so someone sent an email.
No, there's plenty of those too.
I've sent plenty of emails, and I called a detective this morning to complain about Escondido Lodge, because the police were not helping at all. So I spoke to a detective, then I called Brandy, she called and spoke to the detective. So in her eyes, her response was, I have never heard of this area or this hotel being a problem. I have called repeatedly. She has called repeatedly. She has called repeatedly.
For years.
Years, ever since COVID started.
Blind eye's been torn.
Not one person.
Nobody looks.
All I'm trying to do is find out who's giving them vouchers. How do I find that out?
Because they're not doing what they're supposed to do under that voucher system.
It is a massive drug whorehouse, and is a very big problem in our neighborhood. We all have small kids.
Okay, here's what happened. I'm gonna tell you my story anecdotally. And I'm not dismissing you guys. But what happens with me in patrol is I get all these emails and phone calls. We've been calling, all this stuff, and everybody's upset and frustrated, right? I look into it and I go, wow, we didn't hear as much about it as people have said. I'm not saying with you guys, right? And you go, we called 1,000 times, and you look and it's only been in 2 or 3 times. Again, I'm not saying about you. What happens sometimes is you guys have been living with this frustration, but I'm gonna tell you, today is the day that we know about it. So I'm gonna plead to you, suspend your frustration at us, because right, wrong, or indifferent, for whatever reason, we didn't know about it, and now we do, okay? And I will take you guys and all I'm asking for the benefit of the doubt from you, okay? So give me a chance. That's all I'm asking from you. And if you don't want to work with me, fine, I'll grab the other people that do. We'll go off to the side and we'll talk about it, and you will have a point of contact. And again, I'm not gonna promise anything, because I don't know if it is homeless. I don't know if they do have vouchers.
That's what we're trying to figure out.
That's what we're trying to figure
out.
No, I know, but we're gonna find out for you.
I mean, this is like a full-time job for me. I live across the street from this shit show. I have 3 small children, so
I
thank you for
understand your
addressing this,
frustration.
but
So at the end of this, let's meet over here. All right? And we'll have Sergeant Valdivia and Officer Muhammad, and we'll talk about it, if you choose to work.
Quick question. I know that a lot of the homeless situation here isn't our own community's homeless. What I'm hearing from other places, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of communities are telling people, I know I have a lot of friends that work at Interfaith, Just go to Escondido, they have a lot of services. So everybody is being sent here. Is there anything being done in outlying communities that can get support services so Escondido itself doesn't have to take the brunt of the homeless situation?
So we meet on a regular basis with all the North County cities. And I'll take a little bit of a step back in history, talking about the hotel voucher stuff too in this conversation. There were cities that have hotel vouchers and they'd send them someplace where the hotels are cheaper. Escondido does have cheap hotels. And so we were receiving a lot of people from other cities coming here to stay in Escondido hotels. And what's happening? We uncovered this through conversations when we talked, not only from reports to the police department of activities that you're referring to, we were uncovering this. So we had a county-wide conversation. Mayors, city managers, all the top leadership in the county getting together, having a conversation specifically about this. Everyone said, this has got to stop. If you have issues, you have homeless in your city, you need to address that locally. You need to stop sending them to other cities. Stop sending to cities who are doing the great work and creating opportunities for service providers to be doing outreach, trying to house people, trying to solve some of these problems. It's not a burden for one particular city for you all, funnel people to. So that stopped. In addition to that, over the last few years,
Sorry.
Over the last few years, as a North County, we've been working very closely together to talk about what we're all doing, okay? And what services that we're doing, what service providers we're contracting to, what successes were happening, what are we seeing? Are they seeing people from Escondido go to other places? Oceanside has plenty of service providers. They're doing some great work there. Vista is doing some great work there. Carlsbad is doing some great work. Escondido has been doing some great work for a long time. So I'm happy to say that from the cities in North County, everyone's doing a lot of good work. They're all putting resources towards this. They're all trying to provide services across the North County region. Okay? Has people gravitated to certain places? Is there some stuff that's probably going on that maybe shouldn't? Possibly. Now, what I'm talking about from a governmental standpoint, there are other organizations, I mentioned this earlier, there are other organizations, other providers, other people out there trying to do good work, maybe offering a place to stay at a hotel, but maybe having a negative impact that they're just not really connected to. For example, let's say, hypothetically, I am someone who has some resources, and I want to help the homeless people. So I'm walking around the street saying, here's a hotel voucher, here's a hotel voucher, here's a hotel voucher for the Econ Lodge. Okay? I don't know what happens there. I'm trying to help somebody. Maybe that's happening. If that's being offered out, that's not something we would be aware of. Okay? And it sounds like you guys have made a lot of phone calls, and we are not quite connecting. And that's another reason why we're having these conversations.
That's not our problem. You guys are not connecting.
And that's why we're having these conversations. Something's falling through the cracks. So we have the opportunity tonight to have a discussion, right? Captain Kramer said, come on over and we'll have a deeper dive into this, and we can see where we're failing at, because we want to hear where we're failing. And how did that failure keep going on for so long that was led to this level of frustration? We don't want, like Captain Kramer pointed out in one of the slides, we want that community harmony, right? We want us to be able to coexist in some way that will lead to those who are unhoused, housing, change their life, there's some sort of transformation. So, yes.
Is Randy Teakin here?
That's me.
That's you?
Yep.
We got your, remember when I said, I heard about it today for the first time? Your email had bubbled up through the chain today at
That's good. That's what we wanted to do.
Randy, did you email the sergeant? Pardon me? The sergeant that we talked to today, or did you email just that police department?
Before we go there, we have a hand up over here. I want to make sure.
Some municipalities have identified these properties, hotels that are a problem, and have actually purchased them through grants and run through maybe a nonprofit. Is that something the city has looked at? That way you solve like two problems in one shot.
We actually tried to do this. There's a project that was some funding that came available from the state, Project Home Key. And so what that did is it put some money available to try to do that. We teamed up with Interfaith and developer to try to create an atmosphere to try to solve chronic homelessness. We had a lot of funding for the program. What it came down to is we're looking for a hotel to purchase. And we just couldn't come to terms with any of these hotels. None of them were interested in selling.
But it's still on the books if it comes
The
available.
project is still on the books. We are still actively trying to work on it. We're still trying to come to terms with somebody. Because yes, you're right. It would take one of those hotels off the market. It allows us to provide services and a place for those who are chronically homeless, whatever the situation might be, to get into supportive housing. Supportive housing is a big piece of the conversation. We don't just want to put somebody in a hotel, give them a voucher, because as you know, that doesn't work, right? They need to be housed with some support so that will lead to long-term solutions. So
if that doesn't work, why has it been still going on for 2 years, first of all? And second of all, when is it gonna end?
I don't know anything about the program you're referring to, and Captain Kramer?
Just in general, the voucher program that you guys are working with Interfaith.
So that we're still doing it, but that's not, we're not just putting somebody in a hotel and saying good luck to you. It's a situational thing. If they can't go into congregate living because of COVID or because of a situational thing with that housing, then what we'll do is we'll give them a hotel voucher, not just give it to them, we'll place them using a hotel voucher in a hotel along with wraparound services. There's conversations are happening. If they don't adhere to the rules that are surrounded around that voucher, then they're no longer staying there.
Yes, that is what Interfaith told me. I obviously have called the police and the city many times. The city told me that this hotel specifically is a part of the voucher program. Interfaith is saying they are not. So we're just trying to figure out what the system is, how you guys are planning on fixing it, because you can't keep going on, right? And this is obviously.
Is there a specific hotel in your neighborhood? You know about the.
Just in general, yeah.
Okay, the voucher system as a whole is a county program, so I don't know. I just wanted to make sure you weren't talking about the hotel because.
No, I obviously. Yes, I can't talk about that, but I'm just curious.
Voucher system as a whole.
As a whole, yeah.
Miscommunications is a big deal for us, so I'd love to hear who you talk to in the city so we can make sure that proper information kind of went out. But hand back here, then I'll come to you next, okay?
Yeah, thanks. Rick Paul. I just have a question about the average homeless person we see on the street. Is that person turning, not accepting services, or is that person waiting for services? What's the ratio of services are not available for somebody versus somebody doesn't want them? You know, forget the person that is getting services, they're still homeless, but they're getting some services. What about the person that we're all seeing on the street corner?
It's a good question, and I don't have a direct answer. What I'll do is I'll offer up a couple things, okay? There's a term service resistant that we hear out there. We spent a lot of effort of developing programs that do outreach, that are non-police outreach, to try to develop those relationships. There's a trust that has to develop before somebody will say, yes, I'll believe what you're saying and I'll go into this. Or what's happened in the past is they've gone through this process, they've been housed, but because it's not been supportive housing, it's failed for them and they're back on the streets. And so what we need to do is develop a better system that allows them to be in the house with the supportive things that they need to maintain that will lead to a long-term solution. So what the reason why they're on the streets and why they're not accepting services, it's very complex. I personally have gone out and talked with some of these individuals, and because I want to understand, I want to hear from them. I'm not a licensed outreach person, so I have a curiosity and I care, and I want to know, and I want to understand. And I've talked to some individuals multiple times. I know them by name. They see me walking down the street, and they're, oh, here comes Rob, you know. And because I care, and so I don't know. They don't always want to tell me exactly why they don't want to do that. And so that's why we're also working very closely with our outreach workers to try to understand those things, to try to provide. Is what we're offering not what they want? Do they don't see this as a solution? Well, why? Once we understand that, then maybe we can make some changes that might lead them to saying yes.
So what you're saying is all those people have said no to services?
We have enough outreach out there that I would say, I'd be shocked if you found somebody that an outreach worker did not talk to.
You have your hands full, because they're gonna say no all the time.
We have a question up here.
Yeah, my question is for Captain Kramer. You said in your cops unit you have yourself, one sergeant, 2 officers, and 1 perk, right?
Right.
How would we go about getting more people in your unit.
So,
Like, can we request that through the county or the state?
yeah,
Because it just seems like, no offense, but
it's short, it's
yeah,
anemic.
yeah,
For sure, right?
like you can't, it would be very difficult to make a significant impact.
Totally. That's a valid question, valid concern. And it's actually a little worse because it's really one cops officer, Officer Muhammad, and one PERT officer, because one guy's on military leave, he's coming back soon. So, last year, the council gave us money, unfroze some positions at 5 positions, and 3 of them went to the cops unit. So we could go up to 6 officers and 1 PERT officer. And we have that authorization, and what I wanted to do here was just present current staff as opposed to, I could have listed everybody that we could have on this. I chose to go current staff just because I want to be transparent and honest as where we're at. But we are in the process as a department filling vacancies. And so, how it works for us is we gotta have a minimum number of police officers in patrol. And once we are above that number to sustain just daily normal operations, then we can start filling other positions. And so now you're just competing for limited resources. So some of the chief's priorities that we're dealing with right now are, we got a few promotions that we need to plug in so that we can maintain just a healthy span of control and organization within the department. And then it's traffic and the cops unit, because it is a problem, it is a source of frustration, and we've heard it loud and clear from everyone. And having more officers being able to deal with those long-term problems and issues, and break down the city in smaller components so that, like, Officer Muhammad could work in the area of Mission and Quince, and then the other officer could go deal with the problem that you guys articulated earlier this evening.
Right, because I live in the same neighborhood, and it seems like this wouldn't even cover our situation.
Well,
Yeah.
no,
So that would be, you know.
So the cops units are force multiplier. So in essence, what happened is this: one officer, the Sergeant Muhammad or Officer Muhammad or San Valdivia, will be your face, your point of contact, the one dealing with you guys, and then they'll turn around and now they have the power and resources of the department and rest of the city's assets at their disposal that they can call and organize to help you. This unit in of itself is not gonna tackle the problem. It'll be one officer as a point of contact that will then marshal the resources of the city to deal with the problem. So that officer or sergeant may, like I have on another slide, go, what is going on here? And call someone from the county and talk to the city attorney and go and maybe talk to someone from Public Works about doing something. And then, oh, maybe this is a code enforcement issue. And then make contact with the code enforcement manager and start chipping away at it. I'm the point of contact for the department. Does that answer your question as far as this unit isn't gonna be imposed upon the problem? Yeah, it's not. It is one person, the middleman, if you will, that has the contacts and the time, because they're tired from that radio, starting to keep beating the dead horse on that. But it's key to deal with it.
So is there a plan to have this group have their own line that people can call?
No.
Not right now, but there are, well, I don't even know if it's necessary to have that, because what we'll need is individual officers have emails, and you guys will start having communication with a person, a point of contact.
Can I say, before you go, I also want to address the other question that you had is, how do we get more resources maybe in this, right? How do we hire more people to help in this area? And Captain Greenwood talked a little bit about some additional resources went to this recently, and they're still going through the process of trying to fill some. These are highly trained, specialized individuals, and it takes time to fill these positions. But council is listening. You have Deputy Mayor here, and she's listening. That's why she's here tonight, right? And you can always make public comment at a council meeting for all the council members to hear that. We're coming up on budget time, so they will make decisions on what's happening in the budget and where our limited resources go. So you have a voice there as well, and they need to hear those things. So that's another platform for you. We have a question here, and then I'll come over.
Speaking of force multipliers, I mean, we want to get the badge and the gun out of services when it comes to the community anyway. So how about more civilian, like not necessarily even a clinician, someone who checks these hotels that go around and note, not to get involved, not trying to stop anything, but note that there's problems, because when it comes to the human trafficking issue, it's a San Diego taxi issue. And if we fix it here, it's gonna go to Vista, Oceanside, it's gonna come back here again. Sure. But if we make it uncomfortable for them to be in Escondido, hopefully we can keep them out. So my point is to get away from solutions that involve the badge and the gun, and the solution that involves with community outreach liaisons to these hotels and massage parlors and things like that to make changes to let them know they're being watched. And if not, like the gentleman was saying before, to recoup that property. And if we recoup that property, now we have mental health places for people to go for mental health, people who go that are experiencing homeless as transition, not forever, but as transitional housing, to get them on things like that. So I think we need to, I would suggest that we use a more civilian outreach monitors to monitor these hotels and massage parlors for these kind of situations.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Yusef. I don't. I think we do need to get there and have more civilians. When I was speaking to us being a force multiplier, it was that we got an email today from Randy about a problem, and we're not gonna ignore it. So we're gonna take it, and we're gonna look into the issue and find the right solution for it. But that's specifically for this problem now, because right now, as it stands, I don't know what we have or don't have. And so even though I have a badge and gun, Yusef, I'm still a public servant, and I'm not gonna just pawn something off until I know what I have. And then we're well educated in the ways of services or the county and the programs and departments that the city have, that we could best kind of go, hey, can you help us out?
One last thing, as I go around Escondido and I see people who are homeless in Great Day Park or wherever they are, I always take the opportunity to mention, do you know about Interfaith Community Services Center and the things that they have? And they all have. It is very rare that I come across a person who hasn't even heard of Interfaith. So services resistance is real, and probably have to interview them more seriously on what are the holdups to keep them out, because they told me some things, and we need to make sure that we can address those things that are keeping them out of the system. I just want to say that Interfaith Community Services is out there. People know, they're not just there like they came in from somewhere else and said, okay, I'm gonna just sit on the street because I like this corner. They know about the services, and some of them get up, they go there, they eat, they shower, and then come back to go where they are, but for some reason they're service resistant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. We have a gentleman over here that's had his hand for.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the voucher system. I've heard stories about a voucher system, 28 days, after 28 days, they're supposed to leave, is that correct, one of them? And then if that in fact, is there anybody policing to see if this voucher system is really working? Because I understand also that some of the homeless may go in there for a few days, and then they're back on the street because they don't want to live there. So, I mean, who's policing, or have you kind of figured out, is this working or is it not working, or should we continue doing this, or the money that you're putting out through the city, is this just, we're just throwing it away, or I don't know if you addressed that.
It's a good question, and Holly, you can feel free to jump in, but the early days of the early voucher program, the early days of the voucher program, a couple of years ago, when a lot of that stuff came up because of the beginning of COVID, those programs have been deemed not to work. There's been a lot of flaws with that. That's been evaluated extensively, and here's a voucher, go in this hotel, and you can stay there for 28 days and it expires. Those don't really exist without supportive services that goes along with it. We recognize that others are doing that outside government, outside the view that we have, I don't know if that's happening. It's possible it's happening, but not from my understanding. So I think the news around that is still a little old, it's still lingering out there, but nothing that we're involved with, nothing that I know any North County cities or the county in general is, here's a voucher for 20 days and good luck to you.
You're not giving vouchers out, is that what you're saying?
Through service providers with services attached to them, with rules and guidelines attached to that, yes. But you're not gonna be in a hotel by yourself for 20 days and we don't check on you. There's not some sort of services that are attached to that.
And
On these?
It contradicts what they're saying. Yes.
Exactly.
what we're experiencing.
Maybe we're gonna check on that.
Not saying.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure, absolutely, we will.
And our program here in Escondido, at least the one that we're running, it's only been in operation for the last few months. It's a newer program, and we did this because of outbreaks. We wanted to make sure that people had a safe place to go, so when they did want to say yes to services, there was a place to get them off the streets. And so it is 28 days. We do that because after 30 days, they have tenant rights, because they establish occupancy. So that's why the 28 days is kind of written into the contracts. And we do have them report outcomes. And so we do get monthly outcomes stating, what numbers there are. We have, again, clinicians, part of the team. And our goal is to either transition them back, obviously finding housing, exiting into rapid rehousing or other types of programs. But our goal is not to just recycle and have them go back on the streets. There are rules, there are regulations. It's not this like disorderly kind of chaotic situation. We do want to make sure that we provide a safe alternative for when we don't have capacity at our shelter or when the people can't get in there. So if you want, I have my business card in the back. You're more than welcome to follow up with me. I can share with you some of the numbers of the hotel and some of the outcomes that we have so far. Happy to do that.
Can I add something, if you don't mind? I think part of the confusion, kind of what I'm hearing is, you're hearing about this voucher program. This voucher program was a program early on during COVID, and that was through the county. The city has not provided vouchers except for within the last couple months.
Yeah, it's a newer program, again, based off of need, based off of what we heard from people experiencing homelessness with lived experience, people, because we want to hear their voice in the design of our programs, and also from our service providers saying that, hey, we're having trouble, we can't do intakes, and instead of having 2 out of 3 shelters in North County closed for months at a time, we wanted to provide an alternative, especially during the winter months when it was the coldest.
What is the success rate now for the program so far?
I would have to look at, because we have so many different programs that we're running that I want to make sure that I don't misspeak about that particular program. But you're more than welcome to, yeah.
Wait, a question here.
Going back to the hotels, we talked about having access to grant money to maybe purchase it. That's the carrot. Have you looked at a stick as far as public nuisance laws, as far as some of these property owners that don't want to sell but have a higher call rate because of the way they manage their properties? So you look at that.
Yes, Quality Inn Mount Vernon was one of those properties where we have lots of calls for service. And to my knowledge, and law enforcement in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, my knowledge, those calls for service don't exist any longer. I'm not saying it's a zero, because every property of those size and has that kind of, transitory, in nature has some calls for service. There's always something that's kind of possibly going on. But from where it was to what it is today, it's been cleaned up. And that doesn't mean, so what happens sometimes when some activity is happening in one place and they've stopped it, those individuals who are doing that maybe have found a new home. And that might be some of the stuff we've heard. We'll back and then I'll come to you.
So on that note, you guys have been saying we're calling, but Randy sent an email today, you guys are now paying attention. Just help me understand, as a part of the community, why we've all called multiple times, but you're not paying attention to one person sends an email. I'm just trying to understand the protocol here and what the best way is to communicate. Apparently calling is not one of them. So can you just help me understand why the one email made a big difference today?
And I think that's what Captain Kramer wants to uncover.
Well, I think it's a general issue in the public, not just with us.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. That should not have happened.
Yeah.
That should not have happened. I'm shocked hearing that myself, and I'm sure everyone in the room that works for the city is shocked at hearing that. And we need to do better.
I mean, don't just think it's me, it's
No.
more than one of us here.
I get that. I get that. There's quite a few people, and there's probably quite a few people who aren't here that's probably,
Correct.
have experienced what you're talking about in that area for sure. So I appreciate you're here, being a voice not only for yourself, but maybe those who aren't here, and also everyone else who's here being that same person. So
I'm just wondering how we about it differently.
we have an opportunity to learn from this and improve, and so I thank you for that. I really do. This is sincere. I'm saying that, and Captain Kramer saying, "Come on over here and let's have a conversation. Let's figure this out." Not just to address your issue, but if there's a systemic problem there, we want to address that as well, because we don't want somebody else to experience what you've experienced, or any of you, right? So, yeah.
Can I ask a quick question
Yes.
about the voucher program? Do they take into account the neighborhood that, we're in a residential neighborhood with children, and we have a lot of sex crimes going on, so I don't know if they know the background of the person, if this person has got sex, you know what I'm talking about, and then they're put in a neighborhood with children.
Yeah.
Does that factor in?
Well, there's sex trafficking, is what they're
Yeah,
doing.
there's sex trafficking.
But I mean, if someone, say, was a pedophile, and he
They don't
falls-
place them in our neighborhood.
They don't?
No, I don't know.
I'm wondering, that's why, I don't think they even think about it.
And ESG is a low barrier program. We want to remove restrictions so there isn't, I know to my knowledge, Airbnb does not do background checks for shelter admittance. And so that, I think this is the same standard for our shelter.
They don't do?
No.
So
Again, I do not know the specifics of the voucher program. And again, I'm not sure if the Econo Lodge is associated at all or affiliated with our program. I'm just saying it's a low barrier program, and so the purpose of the program is to get people sheltered, and again, working on different barriers. So that's my understanding. I'd have to review the contract specifically if it outlines that. Again, the conversation tonight was around policing and homelessness, and I know this is obviously a concern and we want to make sure, but it sounds like some of the things are police-related matters and not having to do with vouchers, and we want to make sure that you can talk to Captain Kramer afterwards and address those things. But if they are homeless related and they are attributed to the vouchers, we want to be aware of those so that we can address them on our
So
end.
I can talk about some of the experiences that we have had. There have been other agencies in other cities that have given out vouchers that the county provided. They were county agencies that they came to Escondido.
Yes, yes.
And they do not check, and it's really the county goes, "Hey, hotel owner, are you willing to accept our vouchers?" And the lower end ones, like the ones that you guys live in.
Yeah.
We are not in a lower end neighborhood, PS.
No, the hotel is.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, why is there a lower end hotel in our neighborhood?
Because it's always been there.
It's not been like this. I've lived there for a very long time.
Not this low.
Let me answer
Hasn't been this low.
I want to finish my statement.
They did
and
do
then-
sex trafficking.
And then I told all of you guys.
15 years ago.
That would be over here and we'll talk about it. So I am talking about the voucher system, where they call up particular hotels and ask if they would accept it.
Well, cause and effect.
And they say.
I believe the voucher system is what's causing the problem.
And they come.
So you're saying it's the county though?
So it's a hotel user.
We don't know if there's a voucher.
I don't know about this one, there was a time where people
City said it was
did
a voucher
come
program.
in the voucher, yes, that hotel voucher program from the county with that housing first model, right? That was their paradigm, housing first, get them off the streets, and they threw vouchers at people. Yep, and it caused us a little bit of trouble.
Headache.
Yeah, it did.
And they're,
Not only in
they're
that part of town,
transporting.
but other parts of Escondido as well.
Which doesn't, it kind of does speak to the complexities of homelessness and finding solutions. And you talked about restrooms, you talk about the problems with the restrooms, you could provide that. Talk about doing this, and it's gonna have a negative effect here. So we are trying to find solutions. Believe me, there's a lot of effort, not just from the City of Escondido, from the county, from the state. I mean, it's a large problem. There's a lot of money being invested in this space to try to find solutions. And unfortunately, it's not easy, and there's gonna be missteps. And it's gonna have impacts, that weren't thought of, that weren't imagined, right? And so, we're here to tell you that we're continuing to work on this. And you are part of this, and I appreciate you being here and letting us know some of the missteps that you are feeling the pain from, right? And we want to get involved in that too. So I want to be respectful of people's time, and I know you guys are all here till the end, and I appreciate that. And I don't mind staying a little bit longer and having some more conversation on it, but I want to see if we can maybe, see if somebody else has anything else they want to bring up other than the hotel voucher stuff. Yes.
One of the issues that was mentioned quickly and went by was the idea of the resistant person there. And I really support the idea of actually going out and interviewing as in a survey of homeless people about what they feel that they need, what they feel would help them. How should it be delivered? With what attitude should it be delivered? With what frequency should it be delivered? And what part they are willing to play in their own life situation. It needs to be a well-designed survey to really use to enlighten this whole effort, because the number of homeless people is doing, I've been involved in these meetings, by the way, for about 2 years. And this is the first time I've been in a meeting with a lot of pushback. And I'm so glad to see this conversation. I've been in a lot of these meetings that have been so dead you could hear a pin drop. So this is a good thing. But what I think is needed is more information to give feedback about the services. I know you're all out there trying, and you're all looking through a certain frame, and yet you're getting resistance from the people you're trying to help. And I think it may have something to do with people not wanting to go in what's being offered, as in congregate settings, or not really needing permanent supportive housing necessarily, but maybe something else that does convey more dignity and respect for their own choices. This is Escondido, City of Choice, and yet we're talking about imposing certain criteria on people about what they should accept as a part of the housing that they get. And so anyway, it is a problem in that there's not enough housing, it's too expensive, the low-income person cannot afford it, so they're out there, they have to poop somewhere. And I'm really glad the issue of bathrooms came up, because there's a long line out front of the library, and the library opens. People go in, they have to accomplish some things that are not being provided for with the current system. And the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over again that was already not working. And that's what I think happens. I know there's a lot of people working on it, but maybe they're barking up the wrong tree to an extent, and a survey or a study could help know where the changes need to be made. So that's my observation.
Can I offer just a quick response to that? There's a new concept out there, it's divine nameless, and I mentioned this earlier. There's really, other than the City of San Diego, right, they are trying to do a portion of this. We like the concept a lot because it does a lot of what you're talking about. It lists everyone who's experiencing homelessness. We go out and we talk to them. We understand who they are, what's their situation, and then talk to them about what are some possible solutions. And then really understanding, is this something we can afford to do? Is this something that we have the resources to provide? But until we have those conversations, you're right, we're missing the mark. And one size does not fit all.
The money, actually, because a lot of money is going into this.
So one size does not fit all, right? But we don't have unlimited resources either. The dollars that the City of Escondido puts towards service providers and solutions, that comes from the federal government. Some of it comes from the county, right? We don't have a lot of, the city, does not have a lot of general fund dollars. We are spending zero general fund dollars on providing solutions. We don't have the resources. We just don't, simply don't. But we are doing everything we can. We're going after grants. We're going after home key funds, right, from the state to try to buy structures, right? Try to then turn around and offer some solutions. But you're right, we need to go out there and have these conversations. We need to understand that on an individual basis, what's going on. If it's a no, that's why I'm out there having conversations. Why aren't you accepting services? Have you gone to Interfaith? What don't you like about Interfaith? I don't want Interfaith to have that conversation, I wanna have that conversation. So I wanna understand that, because we are missing the mark somewhere, because otherwise they would be on the streets hopefully, and some sort of solution that's being provided. So, there is work to be done in that area, and I appreciate you coming in and saying that, because you've said this before in a previous meeting, and I appreciate you bringing that up again.
Would the city be willing to work with the Downtown Business Association and the business owners to do something like putting porta potties out there and having somebody come and clean them? You know, we probably want it done every day, but we can try to find the money for it if that's what it takes in the short term to give the individuals that are down there someplace to go where they can use a facility and not have to do the business in the alleys, because there's not a day that goes by that I'm not out back spraying things down out in the
How
alley.
about the city council reallocate some money to do this?
I would love for
Wouldn't that be a
that.
great idea?
But I mean,
Once you give somebody the funds to do these kind of things. What the hell are they doing with it?
You know, will the city allow us to contract with a Andy Gump and have them set a porta potty out in, what is it, lot 2 or something, whatever the one is over on Second Avenue, or somewhere where it's not gonna be offensive to somebody that has a house over that way. We gotta set it far enough away because somebody's going to complain about it at some point, guaranteed, but what can we do? You know, I mean, walk down the alleys right now, it's disgusting. We're losing business because people are telling me they don't wanna come downtown because it's getting to look so bad.
I walk those alleys on a regular basis, and I get public works. Jake knows this. I call him up and say, "Hey, Jake, we have an issue over here. We are very responsive."
Appreciate that, but I'm just saying it happens every day. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Be
It's
proactive versus reactive
Yes.
with the solution.
Yes.
Rick, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to support what Randy said, that when homelessness is the number one problem expressed by everyone in the community, for you to say that we have zero general fund dollars, that's the wrong part of the answer. The community is not gonna tolerate that.
And that's why
I'm just being honest.
Right. So, it's where do you take the money from? It's, you know, we have millions of dollars coming in from the federal level, right? That are being allocated towards it. So it's not like the city is not funneling money in this space. When I'm making the distinction of zero general fund dollars, that doesn't mean the city is not finding other resources, other revenue sources to put towards solutions. So maybe my terminology and the way I phrase it probably painted the wrong picture, but the fact is there is money coming through the city that goes towards homelessness.
And just to add to, we're about to have a public hearing with our CDBG, which is our Community Block Grant Funds, which the city gets $1.8 million. Again, some of these can be funded into capital improvement projects. These are fixed issue, like needs. That could be like, you know, programs, housing, resources, permit programs that we can look at. We know homelessness is one of the top issues that from our consolidated plan that was done several years ago, and we know from our recent survey, it was the top issue. We know that people here, so we please, there's gonna be a public hearing, so what that means is that it'll be open for a month period. We'll put programs and recommendations out. Please give us feedback on what we should fund. Let us know and tell us what your priorities are, so that when we go in front of council, we say, of course we're gonna be funding X, Y, and Z, because we heard from the voice of the community that this is what you guys wanted. And so if it is basic needs, if it is, you know, these kind of things, you know, please let us know. We also get emergency solution grants. We don't get as much money with that, but we still get about like $300,000. And so there are projects and things that we can look at with that as well. Please provide us feedback so that we can make sure that we're funding the projects that you guys want to see done.
What's the percentage of issues with the homeless situation, so homeless people? Is mental health the biggest issue? Is drug addiction the biggest issue? PTSD, is that the biggest issue? Or is poverty the biggest issue? What is the bigger, more fundamental bottom line issue that kind of branches out and creates, you know, kind of cascades and creates probably poverty at the very end. I'm not sure, I'm asking you.
So there's a,
For housing.
That's what it is.
we talk about, a lot of different complexities around homelessness, and I brought up the by name list as a concept that we're going after. By name list, that's us going out, not necessarily the city, but us, as a city kind of having this initiative to go out and find out as an individual basis, what's really going on. Because an individual doesn't necessarily have one thing, two things, sometimes they can have 10 things, there's 10 reasons, right? So I don't know that I can answer that because we're not actually doing that outreach, and the service providers who are doing that outreach, they're collecting data on individuals, and we don't have access to that data because there's HIPAA violations, their case management, that's a private conversation.
Couldn't you have a general percentage? I mean, there's statistics that can tell you so that you can direct your efforts into one or another direction, knowing what the main problem is so that we can then address that. Some people say that it started with Reagan, who closed down all the mental institutions, and that just left people, without any help, and that's how that's cascaded into the problem we have now. Do you have anything to say about that?
It's a big statement.
It is a big statement. We have.
I don't know. I don't have a direct comment. I mean, I don't know if anyone else does, but I'd open for the floor. But I will say, like she was mentioning earlier, is what we're doing doesn't seem to be working, and we need to do something differently. So that's why I bring up the by name list, because until we have these direct conversations and we get to know a little bit more, yes, we have some general knowledge. How many are chronically homeless? How many males? How many are females? How many are families? How many families with treat?
What are the reasons?
What
are the main reasons of why they're homeless?
And can I ask a kind of follow-up to what you referred to as the service resistance? What are the reasons for that resistance to accept these services?
Yeah, I think we have kind of two different things a little bit. What are the main reasons? It could be a combination of things, right? Is it an addiction issue? Is it a mental health issue? Is it because affordable housing is not available? Is it something that led them there and they just can't get over the hump and get out? Maybe they've tried and they failed and they're just giving up. And they just don't trust anybody to try again. When we did the point in time count, I went around and did a very small interview with over 30 individuals. And I saw schizophrenia, I saw, all kinds of different, reasons why they're on the streets. And so it's really tough to say, 30% is this, 40% is this, and 60% is that. And we provide one solution that's going to take care of 60%. That model doesn't seem to be getting us where we want to be. So.
It truly is a combination of issues. A lot of people start off with one thing, whether it's not available housing. They start using drugs to deal with the fact that they're on the streets. That then compounds into mental health issues. So it is a combination of things. One thing might start and the other things fall in, or the other thing might start and the other things fall in. So it's a combination of issues that I've been seeing in a lot of different reports on homelessness in San Diego throughout the county. So it's hard to put your finger on it, and that's why it's such a complicated, we're still dealing with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd like to we're almost a half hour past our time. Did you have one last question?
Thank you for sticking with it. You're multifaceted.
I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. I just try to get some of the emotion out of this. I'm here to try to.
It's all good.
Thank you very much.